Welcome to the Giving Voice to Mental Health podcast, brought to you by Recovery.com, where each week real people share real stories of recovery. I'm Terry McGuire. Mental health challenges impact so many of us, but together, when we share our stories, we can inspire hope. So take a deep breath, settle in, and listen as Lisa Sugarman gives voice to mental health. Lisa, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Really appreciate it. So one of the things that's interesting is we keep reading, hearing, seeing suicide rates are up, suicide rates are up, suicide rates are up. Nobody ever acknowledges that also means that the amount of suicide loss survivors are up and the people who are impacted by that loss. And I would like to speak today specifically to and about loss survivors, but also to that group of people who can do a much better job supporting someone who is carrying that unique grief.
What people don't realize is that for every one suicide that occurs in the world, 135 people are impacted. That means their friend circle, their family circle, their acquaintances. That's a big number because when you do that math and you think about 135 people times 700,000 suicides a year around this world, that's 94 million people a year who are impacted by suicide loss in some way, shape, or form. And that's a huge community. And because suicide is such a nuanced type of loss, people need something very specific in terms of grief and loss support. That's not something that generalized grief support can often give you. You need someone who understands that kind of loss.
So as we begin a discussion about suicide, which can be a triggering topic, it can be an unfamiliar, it can be uncomfortable, and it's essential for someone who may only listen to the first minute or two of this episode. What are you hoping that they understand as a result of hearing some of your story and what you've learned?
Honestly, I just hope that anyone who's listening who has experienced any kind of this type of loss, whether they are maybe a survivor of an attempt or maybe they're surviving the loss of someone they love from suicide, I just want people to understand two things. First is that they're not alone. It's such an isolating experience, but you're not alone. There are so many people who've been impacted by suicide loss. People just don't talk about it.
Right.
The second thing is help is out there. Even if you're someone who says, I don't have a family, I don't have a friend circle, I don't have a support system, you're not alone. There are crisis lifelines and support groups and ways to get the kind of support that you need, even if you don't have your own community to reach out to.
As somebody who lives with depression, it's not like I'm thinking, okay, I'm having these thoughts. I recognize them as a symptom because you don't when you're in it. And I'm going to access help. I'm going to do a little bit of research here and find out what's available to me. Like those two things don't go together in my mind. Like
No.
you need to know beforehand. And like this exists. 988 exists. Other things exist. And that's a hard thing because you're not interested until you need it. And then maybe you're least able to access it or believe it would work anyway.
Yeah, that's the mentality of someone who's in the thick of depression. It's a very, very dark place to be. And it's a place that doesn't lend itself to doing much work. It doesn't lend itself to asking the right questions. I mean, your brain is hijacked. So you're not thinking clearly. You're not making rational decisions. You're, in some cases, not making any decisions at all. So it's important that anyone out there who might be struggling with anything, with any kind of a crisis, understands where they can get help before they're in a situation where they're desperate and they need help.
What are some of those places that somebody who is thinking about suicide or has suffered the loss of somebody in their life by suicide, where can they go?
The best place that anyone can call and reach out to is the 988 Crisis and Suicide Hotline. That is, I don't want to say the end all be all because it certainly is not. There are so many organizations out there who are offering very specific types of support services and crisis management. But in terms of kind of a catch-all, 988 is the number that every single person, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be dealing with, needs to have on their brain, in their pocket, in their phone, on the fridge, wherever they can, to make sure that they have it when they need it the most. I would also say the Trevor Project is right up there for crisis and support for LGBTQ youth who are in crisis. And that 800 number, 866-488-7386. And they also have a texting option as well. I would say reach out to the crisis text line if that's an option that suits you a little bit better. There are a lot of people who are terrified at the idea of picking up the phone and using their real voice to talk to a real human.
Or being overheard doing it.
Exactly, exactly. So texting kind of gives you a little bit of a buffer and a little bit of a separation for people who might not want to dive right into a phone call or a conversation like that. So those are some of the bigger lifelines that people can reach out to that have the support to really help anybody navigate whatever crisis they're facing in the moment.
And there is an option to text 988, correct?
There is an option to text 988. People can go to 988.org and find all the information about the different ways to reach out to a counselor.
Let's step back and talk about your really unique entree into the world of suicide loss.
It's definitely a story. So when I was 9 years old, I had my first experience with death, and that happened to be my first experience with suicide. So my cousin, who lived about a half a mile up the street, took his life. I was told that it was a suicide. We're talking now the late 1970s. My parents were very progressive in that way, and they did find a gentle way of sharing with me that my cousin's brain was sick and that he had died by suicide. And so I understood that from a really young age. The following year, in the summer of 1978, I lost my father to what I was told was a heart attack. And I lived with that narrative all throughout my youth, into adulthood, until I was 45 years old, when I accidentally found out that my father had taken his life. So I've lost my father twice in my life, grieved him twice in my life. And then just about 4 years ago, one of our closest childhood friends, very, very unexpectedly, took his life. So I've lost 3 people that I love to suicide, and it's not an understatement to say that it's changed the trajectory of my whole life.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And I would like to ask you about the difference between the two. I mean, to grieve the same person twice in such different ways is fascinating. Sounds like I don't understand. It's also heartbreaking. But they're so different. Tell me about the difference between those two griefs, thinking your father had died by a physical condition and then learning it was a suicide, and how the world reacts differently to those two griefs and those two losses.
My father was my person in the world. I was his little sidekick. We did absolutely everything together. And he put me to bed one night, and the next day he was gone. I spent 35 years believing that my father had had a heart attack in his sleep and died. And then I found out accidentally that he had actually taken his own life. And I found this out as a 45-year-old woman. And my father was 45 when he passed away.
Ooh.
So there was so much intersectionality. It was just a very, very strange time to find that out. And in that moment of finding out that truth, when my mother did confirm that it was in fact a suicide, I was 10 years old again. My body remembered that grief. The day that I found out he died when I was 10, in the same way I found out that it was a suicide 35 years later. And my body went right back to that same feeling that I had not felt in decades. And then going through all the stages, the bargaining, the disbelief, the anger, all of those things came back in the very same way. And it took me years. It took me years to even get to a point where I could talk about it as a suicide. I wasn't telling anyone. I stuck with the same narrative for several years
Oh.
because my daughters didn't know. They were still young. My family, extended family, didn't know. And I just needed to get my bearings. And it took a long time. I was two different people for a long time. I was a mom. I worked. I had my friends and my family. And then I would go home, and my husband was the only one who knew. After my mother confirmed it, I talked to my husband about it. And I think I cried myself to sleep for 3 years
Mm.
in the beginning. And then you get to a point where you feel like, okay, I'm on solid ground, somewhat solid ground.
Solidish. Yeah.
Solidish, that's a good word for it. And then I wanted to tell our girls because now they were teens, and I felt like we all have inherited trauma.
Mm-hmm.
We all have inherited DNA. And at some point in their lives, they might feel something that didn't feel right, or experience something, or issues might emerge in their life. And I wanted them to be able to talk about it with us or with each other or with a therapist. Told my family and my friends, and started talking about it more openly and started writing about it. I had been a parenting author for years, writing about parenting and work-life balance and that sort of thing. And it just didn't seem authentic to me anymore. It didn't seem like that's where I needed to put my energy. And I had lived experience that I felt maybe somebody could benefit from.
How is the grief of losing someone by suicide different, and how did it hit differently even that many years later?
Suicide's a funny animal in that way. It's a very unique and nuanced kind of grief because you have elements of a suicide grief that don't exist with traditional loss.
100%.
You have the guilt oftentimes. It could be incredibly traumatic in terms of how they chose to end their life. You might have that feeling of what could I have said? What could I have done? You have that feeling sometimes, how did I miss the signs? That guilt piece can be huge with so many people. Some people share very freely what's going on inside, and you know that they're not okay. My father was in the other bucket. No one had any idea. He was joyful and present and loving and someone who, from my perspective, absolutely loved life and loved his family. So it's very difficult, very, very difficult when all of a sudden you're a suicide loss survivor and you don't know what that means because it's a very, very exclusive club and nobody wants to be a member of it and nobody knows how to be a member of it for a very long time.
So let's pull back from your personal story and talk about how someone can support someone who has lost a loved one, or even a neighbor, anyone that affects them by suicide. What are things that are helpful and supportive to say? And what are things you should stay the hell away from?
Well, saying things like, I'm here,
Mm.
I care, I want to listen, let's talk, what do you need? Those are the things you want to be saying.
Yes.
How can I help? Would it be helpful to you if we talked about your person?
Mm-hmm.
Or if we didn't talk about your person? Those are the things that you want to be saying. I wouldn't ever ask someone to give you details
Ugh.
of how someone took their life. I would stay away from passing any kind of judgment whatsoever. Those are the things that I think are going to be the most hurtful to someone when you can tell that someone isn't in a headspace to talk about certain aspects and you push. Don't push. Don't be inclined to feel like you have to be doing all the talking. Just be there to listen. That's the most powerful thing that anyone can actually do, is to hold space for someone who's lost someone like that.
Even the seemingly neutral question, like, weren't there any signs, implies either you missed them or you didn't, and you didn't do whatever was necessary to stop this from happening. I mean, there are so many things that are internalized so differently than you may mean when you just think you're being, chill and having a conversation. It's like,
yeah, we can do a lot more damage than we realize we can do. Like, for instance, another thing you would never want to say is, I bet you feel so guilty.
well,
I mean, you might as well just punch someone directly in the face, because that can be so unbelievably hurtful to someone who is, of course, feeling some degree of guilt. So those are the things to stay away from. Just really try and be as neutral and open-minded and non-judgmental as you can be. It's all any of us can do to really support someone, because what someone needs is so subjective.
Yes.
You just don't know unless you're the one in the situation.
And that's why you worded all the things you said before as questions, which I think is the way it should be done, because there can be people who, any loss, loss of someone by any means, you want their name brought up. You want, like, you're not reminding me I lost somebody. I never, ever, ever forget. So you're asking me if I want to have a conversation about them. And on some level, you might appreciate, yes, tell me a great story about how, my person impacted your life. And other times it's like, I don't want to today. So that the question, I think, is a really good way to approach it. It's, say, do you want to talk about him? Do you want to talk about her? Do you want to talk about anything? Or do you just want to take a walk? Just want to go to a movie so that we don't talk about anything and we're just distracted.
Yeah.
I love that you're suggesting that.
Yeah. And I think I know for myself, I know in my own life how valuable it is to me, how helpful it is to me when someone asks about my dad, when someone mentions my dad's name, and it brings him back a little bit for me each time someone mentions his name. Or it's a gift to me if someone, maybe from my father's past, shares a story with me that I didn't know. That's a gift.
Yes.
I think people underestimate the value of talking about their person. People just have this instinct that, ooh, I don't want to say anything because if I bring it up, it's going to be triggering and it's going to be hard. Well, that person will probably find a way to tell you if they don't want to talk about it. But in my own experience, both myself and with so many other survivors who I know, because I'm connected to so many survivors now in my life, almost everyone universally wants to be able to talk about their person in some way.
Other than a conversation, are there any things that as a lost survivor that really would have helped when you found out that somebody who hasn't had that experience might not know?
If I had known about the 988 crisis Lifeline, that would have been so powerful for me. Just knowing that I could use that lifeline to just have a conversation about the way I was feeling. A lot of people don't realize that the 988 Lifeline is not just a suicide hotline. You don't have to just be in a suicidal state of mind, having ideation or contemplating the act itself. You don't have to be in that state to take advantage of 988. The crisis lifeline, or any crisis lifeline, is designed to help us through whatever crisis we're dealing with. And grief is a big part of that. So if I had known that I could have picked up the phone and talked to someone who maybe didn't know me and didn't know my situation, and I could be a little anonymous, I think it would have been hugely valuable to me. I wish that I had it. It wasn't really as mainstream back then. But just knowing that there are outlets and that there are support groups, whether they be virtual, whether they be in person, just knowing that there are safe spaces like that to be able to have these conversations with people who understand. That's the thing.
Yes.
That's the element, the factor, the X factor in these kinds of conversations that people don't think about enough. It's one thing to talk to somebody and have somebody hold space for you.
Yes. Which is lovely and rare in and of itself.
It's wonderful.
Yes.
And so helpful. It's an entirely different situation, dynamic, outcome, conversation, when you're talking to somebody who has experienced the kind of loss that you're experiencing. Now, I say that fully understanding that even though there are so many similarities with suicide and what we all go through, it's unique to each one of us.
Of course it is.
Every suicide to the survivor, that loss is slightly different. Depends on the dynamic, the chemistry, the circumstances, the situation. And talking to somebody who has had that experience, that lived experience, puts the conversation in a different category. There's a relatability and an understanding and a bond, call it whatever you want, but there's a quality about that kind of a conversation that separates it. And it's so powerful to be able to sit opposite somebody who has experienced that kind of grief and understands what it feels like.
And I like to point out that as a loss survivor, you can also call because you want to support somebody who is, and you say, hey, listen, I've got a friend who just lost her blank, his blank, their blank by suicide. I have no idea how to have this conversation, how to approach them, if I should approach them. Should I leave them alone and give them space? Should I be there? It's not a casserole kind of a situation. And they'll help you with that, so you don't have to be calling for yourself. So I think that's a really important element to be aware of with a crisis line.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They're very powerful tools. They really are. I wish more people took advantage of them.
I do too. And hopefully they will. So one of the things, and I do want to say that I talked to you about this before we were recording, because I wouldn't spring this on somebody, but before I started this work, if I had lost someone by suicide who was close to me, I can imagine thinking, I wasn't enough. Like, how was I not enough for you to stay here? And that they didn't, if they really loved me, they could never have done this to me. Through the work I've done and all of the attempt survivors I've interviewed, you also know this. This is not unique knowledge to me. Many, many people believe, and this is a distorted thinking, but it's still a belief, that they're doing it for their family, for their loved one, that it is an act of love to remove the burden that is me from your life. And I don't ever want to present suicide as a loving gesture. That's a dangerous thing to do. But I also think that there may be some loss survivors who would take a little comfort knowing that that may be what was in someone's mind and not, I don't give a damn about my family. Is that something you can talk to?
I would love to talk about that specifically. And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. It's so easy for the people who are left behind to blame themselves for everything.
Mm.
What we have to remember is that the reason why our person chose to take their life was not about us. It's not about us at all. It's about them. And that one act, that final act, was the only act that they had complete control over. So when they're taking their life, choosing to do that, they're choosing to do that because they're in so much pain that they just need it to end. They need it to stop. And sure, I'm sure in a lot of cases, the person who's struggling does feel like they may be a burden to their family, but they're not doing it because they want to escape their family.
Right.
They can't get out of their headspace. They can't see a way forward. They feel hopeless. And so the only thing that they have complete control over is making it stop. So they're not trying to leave you if you're a partner, or if you're the child, or if you're a family member or a friend. They're not leaving because of you. They're leaving because they're in pain and they don't want to be in pain anymore.
Does that understanding help at all?
I know it helps me. It definitely has helped me. So I have a different take personally in terms of my father. I never knew my father was struggling. My mother never knew my father was struggling. There were no signs.
Wow.
There were no red flags. So I give myself a lot of grace personally. The only thing that I have a little bit of guilt about, and I very rarely, if ever, talk about this at all, but I think it's important to talk about it. I was almost the person to find my father. He passed away at home. And I was creeping downstairs to see my father before I left for camp. He had slept downstairs and I almost woke him up. I got to the bottom step and my mother leaned over the railing and said, "Don't wake Daddy up. He was up late watching the baseball game. Come upstairs. You'll see him after camp." And I so desperately wanted to run in and sneak up on him and kiss him goodbye. And I didn't. And a part of my adult brain wonders if my father was still alive and if he could have been saved. Because he was not found for hours and hours later. And I struggle with that a little bit.
I'm sorry.
I am too. I try to give myself a lot of grace. So to anybody who might be listening to our conversation, who might have feelings of guilt for whatever reason, those just happen to be mine.
Mm-hmm.
Take it to heart when I say you cannot fix what you don't know is broken. And even sometimes, if you do know something's broken, you still can't fix it. And it's not your fault.
With your father, there were no red flags. He seemed to have a joy for life. All the things that would, weren't there warning signs? No. I think we need to address the families and the people for whom there were warning signs. And there may have been warning signs for years, and they may have done all the right things, everything they knew to do. And they may have brought in the kind of help that we encourage people to bring in. And it can still end in death. And those people carry a different grief and carry a different load, maybe have fingers pointed and there's all the weirdness that comes with suicide. How could she not have? Well, they knew she struggled, all of it. What do you say to them? That's such a hard place to live and move forward from.
That is a really hard place to move forward from. And to be honest, I would say, you know what you did.
Mm-hmm.
You know how you supported your person.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, where there's a will, there's a way. And sometimes with some people, nothing you can say, nothing you can do, no amount of help or counseling or medication can fix the problem. And sometimes things happen in spite of our best efforts to stop them from happening. And it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And it doesn't matter what anybody in the outside world says or thinks or believes, because it's no one else's life. It's no one else's situation. It's no one else's loss. So it's wasted energy to be affected by somebody else's impression of what you went through. I would say, in your heart what you did, how you tried to support your person. And sometimes, unfortunately, someone can't get the help that they need when they need it.
As we wrap up, and I'm thinking maybe of someone who has recently lost, more recently, certainly than decades ago, or whatever. They can be anywhere on the spectrum of grieving and healing from it. What can someone further down the road offer in terms of maybe even just a little step to be moving forward?
Well, like we talked about earlier, grief never ends. It just ebbs and flows in different ways. And we somehow learn to weave it into our life along with the joy that eventually does come back. What I would say is the way that you feel right now, whether you're 2 days out, 2 months out, 2 years out, grief is so cyclical. So it's very common for someone years after they lose someone to have a grief attack. I have grief attacks all the time. But that immediate devastation, if you're in the thick of it right now, there's nothing that's going to make you believe that that will ever end and that that will ever change. It does change. You don't grieve less. You don't mourn less. It's just different. I don't want to even say that it's muted or less in some way, because it's not. It's neither of those things. I would just say, take heart that the way that you feel right now is not always the way that you're going to feel. I'm not going to say you'll be over it, because we never are. And I wouldn't want to be.
Right.
I wouldn't want to stop grieving for my dad or for anybody else who I've lost, because grief is love. So I would just say, trust in the fact that as you move forward at your own pace, you will not always feel the way that you feel right now. There is another side to it.
Thank you so much. I'm really sorry for all of your loss, and I'm really grateful that you are using it to help other people through their own.
I appreciate that. I am grateful for that every day that I get to do that.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Giving Voice to Mental Health. Thank you so much for being part of this important conversation. And if you or someone you know is looking for support or resources, please visit Recovery.com. They offer a wide range of information, including treatment options. We'll be back soon with another episode. So subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Take care of yourselves and each other.